very helpful. So while in triune God, Lord Jesus Christ is expressing it is the job of the Father who is gonna express the last hour. That makes sense for us as a Christian, and then it made sense for Matthew and Mark as the author of the Gospels. And they didn't go away by saying, oh, Jesus cannot be God because he didn't know the last hour. But what about Allah? He doesn't have any other persons in himself, yet he's still lacking basic knowledge. What would you say to him?
Yeah, so so here, just as a reminder to people of what you said, Muhammad wanted to portray his deity as all-seeing and all-hearing. You know, he knows everything, right? Those are even names of Allah, the all-seeing, the all-hearing. And he did this because he wanted to claim that he was a prophet in that long line of prophets that God sent to the people of Israel. You know, in the Quran, it lists numerous prophets, and it says that Muhammad is the last of those prophets and the seal of those prophets. So he wanted to say that his God was the same as the God of the Jews and the God of the Christians. And of course, the God of Jews and Christians is omniscient. So let me give two passages of the Quran where Allah does this, just so people can see that this is at least the claim of the Quran, right?
Yeah.
In Surah 17:1, it says, "Glory to Allah, who did take his servant for a journey by night from the sacred mosque to the farthest mosque, whose precincts we did bless, in order that we might show him some of our signs, for he is all-hearing and all-seeing." Okay, so that was Surah 17:1.
Yeah.
Allah claims to be all-hearing and all-seeing. Similarly, in Surah 458, it says, "Allah doth command you to render back your trust to those to whom they are due. And when you judge between man and man, that you judge with justice. Verily, how excellent is the teaching which he has given you, for Allah is all-hearing and all-seeing." Okay, so this establishes that at least Muhammad claimed that his God was omniscient.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's a slew of problems here. Not the least of which is that both of these passages actually show us that Allah is not omniscient.
Yeah.
Right? We don't even need to go outside of these passages, or at least outside of what's relevant to these passages, in order to show that Allah is not omniscient. Surah 17:1, which I just quoted, is the passage that supposedly refers to Muhammad's night journey. Remember his supposed journey by night from Mecca to Jerusalem. It says that he was taken from the nearest mosque to the farthest mosque. Now, in the Quran, the phrase is al-masjid al-aqsa, right? The farthest mosque.
Yeah.
According to various hadith, I'm not going to read all of these, but if anybody needs them, I'm happy to give them. But according to various ahadith, the sirat of Ibn Ishaq, the tafsirs of men like Ibn Kathir, the farthest mosque refers to Bayt al-Maqdis, which is just the Arabic equivalent of Beit ha-Maqdish, which is the Hebrew phrase referring to the temple in Jerusalem. Now, here's the problem. There was no temple in Jerusalem in the days of Muhammad. The temple had been destroyed in the 1st century. So in the 7th century, when Allah is telling us in the Quran that he took his servant, supposedly Muhammad, by the way, the verse is actually ambiguous, even though Allah claims to be clear. Another example of Allah not knowing everything because his Quran is not clear. But in 17:1, it's supposed to be Allah taking Muhammad, his servant, to the temple in Jerusalem, but there was no temple there. Isn't Allah all-seeing and all-hearing? Couldn't he see that there was no temple there? Didn't he hear that the temple had been destroyed in the 1st century? You know, you asked me who my favorite characters are in the Bible. At times, one of my favorite characters is Elijah the prophet. Because remember when Elijah was mocking the Baal worshippers because their God wasn't responding to them during the contest, And he says, "What's wrong? Why can't your God answer? Can he not hear you? Shout louder." Maybe your God, he literally says, maybe your God is urinating and defecating. He says of the deity of the Baal worshippers. Now, I don't think that this is, by the way, it's even more relevant than one might realize, and I won't go into this now, but there's plenty of evidence that the worship of Allah in Arabia came to them from Baal worshippers, that Allah actually was a idol named Hubble. They called it Allah, their chief deity, and they received it from pagans who regarded it as their Baal. But in any case, here we have an example of Allah claiming to be all-hearing and all-seeing, while demonstrating at the same time that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Right? Allah didn't know there's no temple in Jerusalem.
Maybe sometimes, people have, like, I wear glasses because I can't see distance. And my left ear doesn't hear well. It just doesn't work. Maybe Allah does have some of those practical issues. But probably in the time of Muhammad, there were no booths for him to go and get glasses and ear doctors. Anyway.
Yes. And you know what? That wouldn't be too far of a stretch, because if you look at the Hadith literature, Allah lives in a house, looks out over a balcony. He's behind a veil, and it screens him from people.
Yeah.
So here you have all these otherwise human sorts of things being associated with Allah. I don't think it'd be too far of a stretch to say Allah has bifocals or spectacles or hearing aids, but maybe didn't have them in on that occasion. But one thing we can say for sure, Allah did not know his history. He didn't know that there was no temple in Jerusalem. He seems to have missed the report. And that also means, by the way, that the angels that Allah has reporting to him, right? They're constantly going up to Allah and they're recording things. So apparently the angels were holding out on Allah for at least 5-6 centuries, right? Because Allah doesn't know. It's the 7th century, and Allah still doesn't know that there's no temple there, right? And the Islamic sources, by the way, the Islamic sources say that when the Muslims later conquered Jerusalem, they were surprised that there was no temple or masjid there. That's why they built the Al-Aqsa Mosque, basically to there's got to be a mosque here. So, and actually, this is where, and Jay Smith would be better to speak to this. This is where Jay Smith would point out that this is probably evidence that somebody else is later writing this in the Quran. And I don't want to go too far down this because this isn't my particular field of expertise, but ask Jay about that. Ask him about the implications of the Al-Aqsa Mosque not being built until 691 AD, when Muhammad was supposedly referring to the Al-Aqsa al-Masjid in Jerusalem earlier in the 7th century.
Yeah, so argument is, when we look at the history, we don't see anything like from Mecca, where the birth of Islam, as well as anything about by Muslim sources for Muhammad and for Islam until the Dome of the Rock 691. Therefore, someone who put together, since we don't have the complete Quran, someone who put together, they had a knowledge of later time and then put them all together. So
they helped Allah.
Yeah, and so we've got Allah and his angels. Like, kind of, angels are not very good worker here. I think he needed to fire them. But anyway, so angels apparently couldn't pass the information, this all-wise, all-knowing, and all-seeing Allah regarding masjid in Surah 17, verse 1. So that's the first reference that all-knowing Allah is not all-knowing at all. Yes.
I want to throw in something here real quick, because I haven't been looking at the comments this whole time, but I did, while you were talking, have a chance to look, and it seems like somebody, they left a comment. They must have come into the conversation at some point after, we've been talking for over an hour and a half, and so they're leaving a comment about something I said way back. So in case the person keeps listening, this person's name is David Wuss. I didn't make up his name. His name is Wuss. But he said this. He said, dude, Anthony claimed that Surah 17 mentioned specifically the temple that was destroyed. He is a joke. Okay, so now I'm going to laugh here because I think I made it very clear,
Yeah.
number one. I made it very clear that Allah is not clear in the Quran, right? Allah doesn't speak very clearly, even though he says he does, because Allah is an ignoramus. However, in the authentic hadith reports, in the Sirah literature, in the tafsirs, there's no question this was interpreted by Muhammad, by his followers, by the scholars of the religion of Islam as a reference to the temple in Jerusalem. I said I was not going to read all those references, but since this individual referred to me as a joke, I'll be happy to read the references. And I'm this is off the cuff here. I just pulled it up. This is from Alfred Guillaume, his Surat Rasulullah, his translation of Ibn Ishaq, the earliest biographer of Muhammad. And here's what it says in Ibn Ishaq Surat Rasulullah. It says, Ziyad bin Abdullah al-Bakhai from Muhammad bin Ishaq told me the following. Then the apostle was carried by night from the mosque at Mecca to the Masjid al-Aqsa, which is the temple of Aliyah, which means Jerusalem, when Islam had spread in Mecca among the Quraysh and all the tribes. So he had this journey at night. He went to the temple in Jerusalem. And the same thing is stated on that page and the following two pages, two other times. It refers to the Jerusalem temple. Again, this is Sahih Bukhari, volume 6, book number 60, number 233. It says, narrated Jabir bin Abdullah. The Prophet said, when the Quraysh disbelieved me concerning my night journey, so the Quraysh are laughing at Muhammad because he said he rode this magical winged horse to Jerusalem and saw the temple, which wasn't there. I wonder why they're laughing. They laughed at him. He says, when the Quraysh disbelieved and laughed at me, I stood up in Al-Hijr, the unroofed portion of the Kaaba, and Allah displayed Bayat al-Maqdis. He's saying that they're questioning me about my journey by night there, and so now they're asking me these questions, and so Allah showed me in a vision the temple that I had seen. Okay, he says Allah displayed Bayat al-Maqdis before me, and I started to inform them about its signs while looking at it. Okay, now a couple of things here. A lot of people won't know the context. There's a lot more to this. What happened is Muhammad claimed he went from Mecca to from the nearest mosque to the farthest mosque. The Sirah literature calls it Bayt al-Maqdis, the temple in Jerusalem, the house in Jerusalem, the holy house, and it's called the temple. Muhammad is saying that the Jew or the pagans start ridiculing him. So now they're asking him questions. Okay, if you went there, then answer us this question. One of the questions they asked, we know from other sources, is how many doors does the temple have, right? And so Muhammad says he didn't count the doors when he was there. So Allah shows him this vision so that he can count the doors while they're asking him this. But notice what he calls it. He calls it in the hadith, Bayat al-Maqdis. So this is interpreting Surah 17:1. Surah 17:1 says the farthest mosque. The hadith says Bayat al-Maqdis, the temple. So all the Islamic sources interpret this as the temple in Jerusalem. So the person who called me a joke is a joke together with Allah for actually pretending that this was made up. I don't know if this person is a Muslim. I don't mean to be at all disrespectful, but if you're going to slander someone, you should at least know what you're talking about. You should pay attention to what the person said, and then measure your words carefully. I've studied these things for over 20 years. That doesn't mean I'm infallible, but I can assure you I'm not just making stuff up. If I don't know something, I'll talk like Allah and say on that occasion, perhaps this, maybe that. Okay, but when I know something, I'm going to say it, and I said and spoke accurately. So
Thank
I
you.
hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you for helping us to see actually you are much clever than Allah with the with the certain informations. And also another reference for Surah 17 verse 1 is Sahih Muslim 309, which gives you the physical description of the masjid, description of the building. And also I am holding, this is like Sahih International translation of the Quran. Sorry, it's just falling. But in this translation, I have a footnote, and footnote just says that is the place in Jerusalem. So even like your Muslim, faithful Muslim translators are simply telling me the building Allah is talking in Surah 17 verse 1 is the building in Jerusalem, and then Hadith gives you all the descriptions.
Yes, yes. Well, I think so. I gave several examples. I have others, but maybe we can take some questions before concluding, or
Yeah, I'm keeping eye on the chat. Apparently, I didn't come a kind of cross with proper respond or proper rebuttal or the questions. All I had, there were a couple of comments. People were simply discrediting discrediting the hadith. So there was a comment on Abu Huraira that he was actually like liar, because of that he got beaten, but that was all it. So I am assuming there is intentional action in the chat, that even I can see there are Muslims there. They don't want to kind of tell us about the knowledge of Allah, but inshallah Allah will guide them so they can come up with proper rebuttals.
yes.
Yeah, sadly, Muslims are silent when it comes to Islam. But if we are talking about Christian scripture or Christian faith, like question after question comes. Yes.
Oh yeah. So I know. I'm just people. I'm just seeing if they're asking anything.
I just had a comment on Surah again, 17 verse 1, and
Mhm.
it was just like says it was spiritual vision, and Jews still pray there. It is sad that like I think it makes sense for me, because like Allah has bad hearing issues, and therefore Muslims are just not hearing what we are just explaining to them. That just kind of, I guess, goes from one generation to other generations. It's in the genes. If father is not hearing well, children are not hearing well. Allah is not hearing well. Muslims are in the chat are not hearing well regarding it was just a spiritual vision, the place Muhammad visited.
Yeah. Now here's okay. I don't know who said that. If it was, oh, is that? Did you say that's what you've heard, or is that? Did somebody say that in the chat?
It was in the comment, yeah.
Okay. So the Hadith literature is very explicit that this happened literally. In fact, here, well, this is a. Let me go to. There's many things I could quote, but this is taken from Ibn Said's Al-Tabakat al-Kabir, and he's relating this on the basis of various hadith narrations. And he speaks of Muhammad mounting the Burak, and it says it moved its ears, and the earth shrank to such an extent that its hoofs seemed to touch its surface at the end of the range of our sight. In other words, it had these long strides. It had a long back and long ears. Gabriel accompanied me, and he never lost touch with me, nor did I till we reached Bayt al-Maqdis, that is the holy house, the temple, and al-Barak reached its halting place. It, the Barak, was tied there, and it was the place where the beasts, the prophets, were tied. So, by the way, the prophets were there as well. So this sounds like a physical place to me. Muhammad's riding this beast. He gets to the holy place, and he ties his mythical creature up. Now, where does he tie it up? By the way, same source says how many. This is where it actually gives us the full account of the Quraysh asking Muhammad all these questions, right? How many doors are there in the temple? So again, it refers to it as the temple. this is not being treated like a vision. Muhammad is said to have gone there literally. It's later that Muhammad gets a vision so that he can then look at what he saw and count the number of doors in order to answer the question of the Quraysh. Okay, so whoever said this is actually reading things from a later report into the earlier one, right? I hope everybody's following that. In other words, what happened was you have the alleged account in Surah 17:1 mentioned in various hadiths in the Sirah literature, where Muhammad is said to have gone to Jerusalem by night. He journeyed there. It's not a vision. He journeyed there and he rode this mythical creature. He got to the temple. He tied his donkey or his whatever there. Then later, when he's telling the Quraysh this, they're laughing at him and quizzing him. And so at that time, it says Allah gave him a vision of what he had previously seen with his eyes, and then he was able to answer their questions. So the sources make it clear that it was an actual place. And that's not just found in the source that I mentioned. It's found in numerous other sources. I mean, I could quote things for days.
So as you are giving proof after proof from Islamic teachings, from Muslim scholars, that actually it was physical, still Muslims who are using the ear of Allah are telling me Allah can show Muhammad the destroyed temple as a spiritual vision, and scholars agree to this interpretation. That's one of the comments. And
well, yeah, but here, let me up the ante real quick, okay? Because remember, I didn't want to read all these, so I didn't have all these sources in front of me. So I decided to pull up one more for you. This puts it up beyond all question. This is Sahih Bukhari, Volume 5, Book 58, number 228. It says, narrated Jabir bin Abdullah, narrated Ibn Abbas, regarding the statement of Allah, and we granted the vision, right, which we made you see as an actual eyewitness, was only made as a trial for the people. So Allah is saying that this vision was an actual eyewitness. In other words, it's not the kind of vision that a person can have merely in their head. It's a vision of actual seeing, sight. Okay, but it goes on. It says, Ibn Abbas added, the sights which Allah's apostle were shown on the night journey when he was taken to Bayt al-Maqdis, the temple in Jerusalem, were actual sights, not dreams. And the cursed tree mentioned in the Quran is the tree of Zakum. So here you have Ibn Abbas, the cousin of Muhammad, one of the greatest Sahaba, right? One of the greatest sources of hadith narrations, saying that this vision of Muhammad was an actual seeing with his eyes. It was not a dream. You can't get any more explicit than that.
I am assuming this is gonna be heartbreaking for you. I hope you got strong heart. So even though you give the references with the details, so come back to that is actually question from the Bible regarding from the book of Isaiah or from the Gospel of Mark on the different topics which question the sin and salvation or deity of Jesus. So that's the comeback to sources which you put together that actually there is a problem with the knowledge of Allah, but there is no comeback. And then I put another comment on the screen. I am not sure if you can see it or not. A Muslim is making a case. Actually, it says masjid means place of prostration, which does not necessarily means a building. It was a space and place where Prophet visited.
Yeah, well, they're not paying attention, are they? Because the hadith that I cited already debunked that. What they're trying to say is Muhammad was taken to the place where the temple had been, but it wasn't there anymore. So it's the place, and it can be called a masjid because a person can prostrate there even though the temple's not there. But the sources I cited speak of Muhammad going to Bayt al-Maqdis, which means the holy house, the sanctuary, the temple. Okay? That's found in the hadiths. It's found in the Sirat literature over and over again. It speaks of the house being there. It speaks of Muhammad tying his donkey to there. It talks about Muhammad counting the number of doors on the temple. So does this empty plot of ground where people are prostrating, where there's no temple, have doors? It's talking about an actual structure, an actual location. And I could go on quoting sources to that effect, but everything I've already quoted demonstrates that. Muhammad actually saw the house. He actually, with his physical eyes, it wasn't a dream. I mean, what do these things mean? That Muhammad saw dirt, dirt with doors? I mean, I really don't understand the reasoning of people. All people are doing when they say this is they're saying, look, we don't really have a commitment to truth. What we have is a commitment to this religion that we want to be true because this religion suits our desires.
Yeah.
Our desires are for things like 72 virgins or more in paradise. Our desires are for hating Jews and Christians and calling them the worst of creatures. Our desires are for this and for that. And Allah caters to these desires. Allah allows us to be these sorts of people, to look forward to these sorts of things. And that's what we like. We don't really want to repent of our sins in truth and have an actual changed heart, a circumcision of the heart, and look in faith to Christ as God's appointed way of salvation. Okay? Because if it was the case that somebody wanted the truth, then they would come to the light. They wouldn't make ridiculous excuses to remain in the dark. And that's what they're doing. It just doesn't make any sense to say, oh, it's not really a temple when it's got doors. Muhammad's tying his donkey to it. He says he sees it. I mean, how much clearer does it have to be? And it also shows disrespect for the Islamic sources. When Muslims have to know that they're not speaking the truth. In their heart of hearts, they know they're not speaking the truth when they say it doesn't really mean the temple. But they can see it right there in the sources I quoted. Muhammad said in the hadith, anybody who knowingly tells a lie about me is going to hell. Well, Muslims then need to tread very carefully when they contradict Muhammad's words and say he didn't go to the temple. He didn't tie his donkey to the temple. He didn't count the doors of the temple. This is all disingenuous. It's not honest. It's not being sincere. And it's basically the actions of a person who loves his sins, who wants to stay in the dark and oppose the light. But you don't have to. That's the whole point, right? You don't have to stay in the dark.
I just put, as you've been giving evidence after evidence, reference after reference, physical description after physical description, and person is just like saying the same thing. I know Allah is deaf. Allah has got like hearing issues. He's got seeing issues, eye issues. Also, I'm just like thinking he's all blinded the eyes of Muslims, and they're not even like listening. It's just like same thing comes with the like more capital letters. It's in the intention, yeah. With my English is not my first language, but I can see there's a spelling mistakes in that sentence anyway. So it's just same thing comes like you heard the reference, you got the physical descriptions, and there is a problem with Allah and with Islam. And repeating the same thing again and again, or questioning Christian scripture on the different topic is not going to help you. On the day of judgment, you are not going to pick up this command and then show it to Allah and then say, look, I said this. It's not going to help you. It just breaks my heart. And you are very kind, as you just say, you are saying they are not paying attention. It's not about they are not paying attention. They are intentionally trying to ignore it. And it is sad. It breaks the heart of Yahweh.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what Dale here is saying. I haven't seen all of his comments, so maybe there are other comments that help make more sense out of it. But one thing he said is prophets claim this in your Bible about visions. I'm not sure what he's saying there. The word visions, maybe he's trying to say, I don't know, that they saw visions and didn't really see something, but The word visions has a range of usage. It sometimes refers to something that an individual sees by inspiration in his mind, but also is used to refer to something that was literally seen. You can't just assume that it has the same meaning in every case. For example, in Mark chapter 9, Jesus takes his disciples up the mountain and he's transfigured before him. They actually see him radiating the glory of God, right? And then it says the Father descends in a cloud and speaks from the midst of the cloud, saying, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Well, as they're going down the mountain, after they saw and heard this event, Jesus said, "Tell the vision to no one until after the Son of Man has been risen from the dead." So Jesus explicitly refers to this physical experience that they saw with their own eyes and heard with their own ears as a vision. The word vision does not always refer to something that's internal to the mind. It sometimes refers to the vision. I mean, what do we say about our eyesight? We call it vision, right? I have vision, right? The word can be used in various ways. And so it's not true that in the Quran or in the Hadith that it's never used to refer to a literal sight. And I already gave the Hadith of Ibn Abbas where he said it refers to a literal sight. Now, he said another thing, and I kind of lost it here, but he said, um,
He's like,
he said, that the Quran doesn't speak about a donkey, Anthony. Well, I don't know what that's supposed to prove. Is he a Quran only Muslim? I mean, we could go two ways with this if you'd like. I mean, if you, I didn't say that the Quran mentions Muhammad's mythical creature. Okay, that's what's written in the Islamic sources. Now, just by the criteria of historical, scholarship, even if we don't take the Islamic approach and say that these hadith are sound because of the standards of Sahih Bukhari, they still meet the standards of historiography. So I don't care if you dismiss them. Approaching things from a historical perspective tells us that these statements are reliable in that no Muslim is going, this is known as the criterion of embarrassment. No Muslim would make up this story that was an embarrassment to Muhammad, an embarrassment to the early Muslims if it didn't happen. Right? No Muslim is going, remember, the Muslims, the early Meccans laughed at Muhammad. They said, "You are a con artist." They said, "This is a sham. It's so obvious." That's why they laugh at him and start asking him questions, because they know he doesn't know the answer. So no Muslim is going to make Muhammad look like a fool. But that's what you're saying if you say that they made this up. These aren't Christians who came up with these sources. They were Muslims. So no Muslim would, but here's so if you want to be, though, a Quran only Muslim and say, okay, let's throw out the hadith because they're not reliable, allegedly, and just go by the Quran, well, then your Quran completely falls apart. It's just a pile of nonsense, because you're trying to say that Surah 17:1 doesn't mean what these other hadiths say, but now you're stuck not knowing what the text is saying at all, right? Look at the verse. It says, "Blessed is he who took his servant," right? I don't have the verse in front of me. Actually, let me pull it up. But it says, "Blessed is he who took his servant." Who's he that's taking someone somewhere? Who's it talking about? It doesn't say. Who is his servant referring to, right? He, we don't know who that is, took his servant. We don't know who that is. Was it Muhammad? Was it Allah took Muhammad? Was it Muhammad took somebody else? Was it, I mean, who's talking here and who's he talking about? Moreover, it says he took him for a journey by night. What kind of journey was this? Did he take a taxi? Did he take, I mean, what does he mean? Was he traveling on foot? Was he hoofing it? Was he riding a camel? Was he riding a Boeing 747? Allah doesn't tell us what kind of journey he's talking about. And then he goes on to say, from the farthest mosque, or from the nearest mosque to the farthest mosque. Well, what's the nearest mosque? Well, it has to be the mosque nearest, I would say, to the speaker, right? Well, I mean, if that's Allah, that's a problem, because what's nearest to Allah? I can't imagine. But if it's talking about the person who takes the journey, whoever that is, we don't know. Well, we need to know who that is to know what the nearest mosque is. Nearest to what? Nearest to who? And then what would be the farthest mosque from that? How do we know unless we know where the nearest mosque is? I'm sorry, but if you're going to dismiss the hadith, bye-bye Quran, because the Quran makes no sense. And what in the world is this verse even there for? Because as soon as Allah says, blessed is he who took his servant for a night journey from the nearest mosque to the farthest mosque and showed him some of our signs, it suddenly switches topics and says, we gave Moses the book and gave it as a guidance to the children of Israel. What is this story all about? There's no way to tell from the Quran by itself.
So,
The only way you can tell is if you read the Hadith, if you read the Sirah literature, if you read the tafsirs, you're not helping Allah out by condemning all the early Muslim sources that tell us what this means.
but he's making now very good case. This is very good case. He responded saying, I am not Quran only Muslim. I use common sense and logic.
Well, I think that Allah should have used common sense and logic. He should have used common sense and logic when he spoke the Quran without being clear and exhaustively detailed, like he says over and over again in the Quran, right? He gives us this gobbledygook that nobody can make sense out of apart from innumerable other sources that Muslims use logic and common sense to dismiss. But now here's the problem. Again, not only with the Quran, those sources are supposedly from your prophet, right? If your prophet delivered these sources and you're applying logic and common sense to them and you're saying, I reject them, they're rubbish, what you're telling us is that your prophet was irrational and guilty of speaking foolish nonsense, right? You might say now, well, I don't believe he really spoke those things, but what's your proof? You can't just say these things weren't spoken by Muhammad. Muslims claim that we've got this sound system of sifting out true narrations from false narrations, and they've got all their alleged criteria, that the chain of transmitters is unbroken, that the people in these chains are known to be reliable people, that these people could have possibly known each other and thus we could have such a chain. They say that this is a reliable way of knowing the accuracy of these reports. So what's your evidence that these are reports that aren't reliable, right? I mean, but now I'm happy to apply logic and common sense to the Hadith material and say this is nonsense if you want to, but then you don't get to put on the brakes when I apply the same logical faculties to the Quran and say this book is unintelligible nonsense, right? The same logic that I get to use to critique the Hadith that you use to critique the Hadith is the same logic I'm going to use to critique the words that your prophet said he got from his God. Remember, Muhammad is the same person that you supposedly get the Hadith from is the same person you supposedly get the Quran from. If that guy was a buffoon and couldn't be trusted to speak an intelligible word, then why trust that he's reporting something intelligible from this God that he believes in?
I am just looking at the comebacks. So suddenly topics change to the attacking the Christian faith or asking the questions on non-Quranical gospels, those kind of things. But there is another comment. Seems copy and paste of Bukhari. So this is the Bukhari like he throwed out. So he picked another part of Bukhari, and it says, so this is not the like throwed away part, but other part. In Bukhari, it is related that when the angel came to the Holy Prophet on another night, his heart saw and his eyes slept, but his heart did not sleep. But their hearts did not sleep. Then Gabriel accompanied him and carried him to the heaven. Sahih Bukhari 61:24. So that's the comeback. Not sure what to make of it. Beside like all Islam contradicts itself and messed up, and it's not only Allah fails basic knowledge, but Allah fails basic common sense. But that's what my common sense says.
So one of the things, this could get very technical and involved, but one of the things that does have to be done is sort of, you group all these hadiths together and you try and figure out something of a chronology, which is very difficult to do, right? Because the hadith don't really provide a chronology. They're just these sections of things Muhammad said or did that are just right there in Bukhari. There's nothing before or after them, right? So we have to realize when we read these that, well, we're limited at this point, right? We know that it comes after something if he refers to it, right?
Yeah.
If it's being made as a historical statement. Well, at the same time, we get hadith narrations where Muslims are actually arguing with each other. I have one of the examples I was going to give of Allah not being all-knowing in the hadith is I wasn't going to bring up this particular hadith, but what happens is in a hadith, two Jewish women go to Aisha, and they say to Aisha that people are going to be tormented and tested in their graves. And it says that Aisha shuddered when she heard about this, right? That people, when they're in their graves, are going to suffer and be tested. And so when Muhammad comes, Muhammad at first is very upset that these Jews said that to her. You know, he doesn't like what they said. It's not true. But then Muhammad leaves and he comes back later and finds out, he found out from Allah, no, it's true that people are actually going to suffer in their graves. And this is where suddenly Muhammad starts hearing voices from graves, right? He walks by a grave and he hears Moses praying. He hears Jews wailing in their grave because they're being tormented. He says that people hear his greetings to them. And then he even says that whenever people greet him, Allah puts his soul back in his body and he hears their greetings. It's just all this craziness comes out of his initially finding out from the Jews that people are alive in their graves, right? And anyways, but we're told in one place that Aisha, when Aisha didn't believe that Aisha didn't believe that something somebody told her was true. She thought that they had misunderstood a hadith from Muhammad, right? So this hadith actually reports Aisha's opinion. And so some scholars will say, okay, Aisha's opinion is probably right, right? Uh, but then what you find out is all the hadith is really doing is telling you this was Aisha's opinion until she's been later corrected by another person who had a reliable chain from Muhammad who couldn't be contradicted. And so all I'm pointing out here is simply quoting a hadith that contradicts all these other sources doesn't mean, number one, that the hadith is unreliable. It could have been a real report from someone. But two, it doesn't mean that it's the true account. It doesn't mean that it's the account that Muhammad actually, comes from Muhammad. So there is a lot involved here, but my observation is simply that you've got this consistent flow from the hadith in Bukhari to the tafsir, to the sirat. All these sources speak of it as a literal event that Muhammad actually saw. And so, simply finding a statement that might appear to contradict it isn't sufficient.
And on the another kind of side of it, it shows today 21st century Muslims can't even trust the customs of Muhammad. And like if they start questioning which hadith pick, which hadith throw away, or which hadith you make a barbecue from, it's all gonna end up in you are supposed to follow in a full submission to Muhammad, but you are just butchering everything Muhammad is saying because you don't like how the hadiths are kind of reliable or not. You don't even trust them today. And of course, we are not surprised to see there is a even like Muslims in House of Muslims, they disagree with one another actually what Muhammad really did and what Muhammad really said. And that's just like sad. And yeah, I'm not getting any good help from Muslims from the comment. Just sad. It is sad because you are making a case that there is a problem in the knowledge of Allah according to Islamic sources, and all Muslims are doing like jumping from one branch to other branch in the forest, and they think like that forest is never gonna stop, never gonna finish, so they will survive there. But no, that forest is gonna finish one day. That branches you are jumping from one to another, it's gonna destroy one day, or it's gonna come to the end. And in that, and it might be too late for you.